All right, back at another, raw, unfiltered, how we do it session. So we sparked a thought. Hey, we're showing people how we find houses. Okay, that's great. But then we kind of brushed over, and then you just call the landlord and you schmooze them. There's so much more nuance to it than that. So you brought up the idea of doing a kind of our conversational mapping and how we handle objections video, and I thought this would be a great time to just kind of jump into it. We literally have an entire module in our school community specifically dedicated to this. So we'll just be teaching from that today because it is what we've used, and this is what works for us and what we've recommended to other people. So as always, take whatever you can from it, even if there's like one trick in there that might help you out. That'd be great. I think the importance of the conversational mapping, it helps you stay on track. So we talked about how scripts kind of make you robotic. The beauty of a conversational map is going in the points that you want to hit. And you're authentically doing it and not like a robot when you're not repeating something you've rehearsed from a script. So you want to hit these like 10 points, and you just weave the conversation with the landlord or the owner through that, through those points fluidly. It comes across more natural. And most importantly, it helps you stay adaptable. Your adaptability goes up when you do as a conversational map instead of a script, because you're reacting to the landlord. You're not, just, rehearsing. And that'll boost your confidence going into it. And I would say, Alex, like the only thing you like really like when I talk about like preparing and like really truly rehearsing objections, since we know what the objections are going to be already, right? And we have like a list of 10. We'll go over a few of them today, but we know what the objections are. We know what the landlords are going to say. So just rehearse what your response is going to be for that, so it comes off naturally and you're prepared. Exactly. You're prepared, right? So that's my intro.
Yeah. And so, very well said. So, like specifically with the objections, like you said, that's probably the one thing that whether you're trying to get your first arbitrage unit or you are looking to scale and you've gotten, you have a few properties already, the more comfortable, like it's always a slightly uncomfortable feeling when you're cold calling someone, right? So that's just stepping outside your comfort zone. So the more prepared you can be with overcoming these objections, the more you're going back into your comfort zone, right? Of just speaking naturally. So, but that, kind of like anything that just takes a little bit of practice and repetition. So overcoming landlord objections is extremely important, but it does not need to be scripted. It just needs to be natural. You need to be familiar and kind of practice these conversations in a way. You could practice those in the mirror, with your spouse, whoever. And that kind of goes right into like with conversational mapping. So with conversational mapping, like you said, in your head, you've rehearsed, all right, these are the talking points I want to hit and so naturally you are guiding the conversation in the direction that you want it to go. But you'll have a bit of a brick wall or a little interruption to your flow when the landlord in person or on the phone says, oh, but what about this? I've heard, people, Airbnb or short-term rentals, there's, more property damage to that. Like they always hear in their mind, if they've never done Airbnb before, their first thought is damage to the property, right?
The worst Airbnb experience ever is what they're thinking.
I saw in the news they set the house on fire from a turkey, a deep fryer, whatever. So, and honestly, that's also linked together with in the beginning of the conversation with your conversational mapping is rapport building. So once you have established some rapport, and then when they interrupt, like with some of these objections, you can also kind of refer back to, in a nice, smooth way, revert back to your rapport, whatever it is. Oh, but Jim, like this and that. The more comfortable you are talking in this, the more comfortable you are talking with the person, the easier these objections will be when you are prepared. So the more natural, like you feel like, hey, I feel like we've known each other longer than, 2 minutes on the phone, but you don't have to say that. But the more natural things sound, the easier these objections will be to overcome in my experience.
And I think we'll approach this from like we'll hit both, like, hey, you're talking with the landlord in person or on the phone. This is applicable to both. So and you hit the first step, build rapport, and that's really your first entryway into this whole conversation, to be human with them, show them you're a human, so you're not some like mindless corporation. And there's a few things that you can do, and Alex, you hit them. I would say another tool in there is like, subtle mirroring of the person's energy and tone. Nothing crazy over the top, but that's like just a little hack or tip you can use when you're talking to people to kind of one, get a gauge of how they are as a person, what they're about, how they're like, what their energy levels are at, and then you want to meet them somewhere close so you make them feel a little more comfortable. Any other big rapport building stuff that you've
So,
personally, we'll go stuff you personally leveraged when you
sure.
reach out to people?
Location, like where is this property? Do you have any sort of connection to that region or that city? Maybe, oh yeah, I went to high school right down the street. Oh, okay. Oh yeah, go Pirates or whatever. So any sort of location specific connection, or maybe there's something in the pictures. Like for example, if I'm making it up, if there was again, we'll stick with colleges or something. If there was in one of the pictures of the listing, if you saw like a University of Virginia flag, like in the background or something. Hey, my sister went to UVA, something. You have to find some in something, even if it's like 4 seconds of the conversation to build rapport, establish, make some sort of connection. Anything you can, that'll go a long way. That'll buy you another 10 seconds of the conversation. And in rapport building, in the first 20 seconds of the conversation, that's everything because you're just a stranger on the phone, right? Let's stick with the phone call example. You're just a stranger on the phone. Who are you? What do you want? Oh, you're calling about the property. Okay, cool. The other thing I like to build rapport about right away is some unique thing about the property or the quality of the property. Oh yeah, it looks like you just did a kitchen renovation. Maybe even if they didn't. Oh, you didn't? Oh no, well, it looks like you did. Oh, cool. Haha. When was the last thing you did? Renovation, update, whatever. Oh, well, I just redid the electric. Oh, boring, but awesome, cool. Whatever.
Yeah.
So I put in some new lights, whatever it is. So locate for me, location and something specific about the unit that you can comment on.
That's good. That's literally the location is when I done, like when I was calling for some of our clients that were buying out of state in Jacksonville. I mean, I lived there in the past, so I was like literally just talking about, oh yeah, I remember living down the street from the Players Club.
Mm,
They're like it immediately broke down their wall, their guard. And then even
yeah.
when I was like, yeah, I'm looking at a property, I don't live there anymore, but like I want to get back to it or whatever. It kind of gets them a little warm and fuzzy. So that's good.
Yep.
Good word there. I would put that in your pocket. The broaching to the next part of the map, I'd say you got to remember you're talking to someone, and especially if you're doing what we look at when we're trying to get if we're trying to find a good deal on a property on a rent, you might be looking at a place that's been on the market for a while, and what means that the owner is desperate to get it rented. So what you don't want to do is like jerk them around and make them feel like you're deceiving them. So we quickly move into business, but in a way that is not aggressive in your face, like we want to rent Airbnb. I like to lead in with something like, hey, I want to be honest, I see your property, I love how it looks, all this stuff. Like I would love to get a lease here, and then they normally like, oh yeah. It's like, but before we go into that, I want to tell you a little bit about like what we do, and then already that's kind of gonna put people on guard because they're not used to tenants telling them what they do. But then that's where you kind of move into your the business of what you do. So Alex, how do you normally handle that transition from rapport to like, okay, hey, we want to rent it out, but we actually deal with midterm and short-term rental, housing?
Yeah. So, and I was going to say, so when you were mentioning that, I did think of one kind of exception to that, which is, depending on the market that, you're calling people and again, this is just kind of part of that conversational mapping, thinking on your feet. There might be a situation where a landlord says, when you start to mention, what it is that you really want to do, they might have heard this before on the phone, right? If they've been, and sometimes you see these properties, especially over the years, sometimes you'll see these same landlord names or apartments come up for rent again, whatever. That's a fun one. But when you're at this point in the conversation, when you're now it's time to talk business. Okay. So what we like to do, if you yourself are just getting started with Airbnb and you don't have this foundation of, oh yeah, we rent, rent and or manage, half a dozen properties over here just down the street from you. If you don't have that experience to kind of fall back on and like get like for like references and things like that, you know, what you can leverage is any mentor that you're working with, right? So if you've signed up through any sort of mentorship, then that is, even if it's this, you are signed up with them, but it's like, think of them as this, like, in this conversation with the owner, this fictional character, but you need to leverage that mentor. Like, oh,
Experience. Yeah.
exactly. Although I'm new to this, the mentor that I work closely with, he or she has, years of experience and seven figures and hundreds of reviews, and I'm working one-on-one with them, not one of their coaches or whatever it is. I'm working one-on-one with a mentor and learning, very quickly. And I'm very serious about this. The more professional you are, the better chances you have. They don't, right? So like, people do not want to, especially when you're just getting started, you have little to no experience yourself as an Airbnb host. You need to leverage, your mentor, their experience, their contacts. Oh yeah, like, because an objection you might face is, what about, maintenance for the property? What do you do if this, if plumbing? Oh yeah, no, of course, yeah, of course, we've thought about that. Yeah, we've got multiple plumbers. Yeah,
Yeah.
multiple people we can
And,
call on.
and that's like the thing you got to remember, right? Like in the beginning, you don't have any experience in Airbnb, but what do you do have? Hey, I've invested a ton of time into studying this, researching this, and maybe you've invested money, and then you're showing them you have skin in the game. You're not just some schmuck who wants to make a quick buck. I invested time, and then like we tell our students like, hey, like you could take a picture of Alex and myself and make up whatever phony title and chief advisors for your business, whatever you want to do, put it in there, and then you can leverage our portfolio, and then it just kind of gives them a little bit more credibility. But even if you don't have that, you just got to make yourself seem professional, and that's where the credibility documents come into play. That's where the slide decks come into play to show them, hey, I've thought about this, I've done the research, this is this is what this place makes in this area, this is what I can do. All that stuff just makes you, look a little better. So you transition to the, and the way that I map out the conversations in my mind at least is like, hey, you have to let them know what your intent is up front. Right. And then you can go into the value proposition of actually how it can benefit them, right? So after you tell them what you do, you then you can lay out what we bring to the table. And Alex, like very quickly, I think you were like one of the things that like, ooh wow, was like, hey, yeah, we have not only do we have our own personal business insurance, we also have insurance for the short-term rental. And Airbnb has air cover for $1 million. And then basically we have 3 types of coverage before it even gets to you, which is already better than a regular tenant.
So on that note, so that's one example of like getting ahead of their objections.
Yeah.
Like there's this kind of like, let's call this the golden hour of this call, or like whether it's in person or on the phone, there's this golden moment where you've built some rapport. This could be 30 seconds in the conversation, depends on how much they're kind of giving and taking, right? But once you've built some rapport, then it's time, instead of just like being silent and letting them give you objections, you can already give them information that will take care of their objections before they even have the opportunity. Give them the positives, give them the overwhelming positives rather than waiting for them to make objections.
Yep.
Because if there are too many breaks in the conversation, they're only thinking about negatives, because they're like, nope, I've been an investor for a long time. I've only dealt with long-term tenants. They're just going to give you objection after objection if you let them. I like giving them, without being like rude and like, shoving, information down their throat. Give them the positive, benefits of this. So that was a good example you gave.
Yeah, and that right there, like we just referenced, right? One of the objections, increased liability. Okay, you overcome it by talking about the insurance. The next one is always like wear and tear. We've referenced that, right? And then how do you get ahead of that? Well, you talk about how we're gonna have professional cleaners come in and clean this property like 2+ times a week. We will literally turn over your property to you at the end of this lease in better condition than when we got it. No long-term tenant will do. So, and then you could talk about like, oh, property damage. People are worried about property damage, or just in general, like, all the different things that happen. Then it's up to you as the host, but like we offer that we handle the things internal to the walls of the unit. So if something breaks or whatever, we have our handyman go deal with these things quicker, and then that just reduces costs for the landlord. All these things are eventually objections that come up. So Alex, I'll hit you with an objection and we'll go through it. Impact on the neighbors, concerns that there's going to be disruptions or that the neighbors are not going to like that there's Airbnb tenants. How would you reply normally? Excuse me.
So right. So a lot of landlords will say like, oh, well, community and we're going to get complaints from the neighbors if there's too many people coming and going. I'll tell you, most people, like if you live in, let's say, just a larger apartment building, 5-story apartment building or something, you may not know most of your neighbors. That's kind of how it is now. Like people go to work, you go home, you hang out with, your friends, your spouse, whatever, but you don't really know your neighbors. So I tried with our first unit. I tried like week one of moving all the furniture in. I saw the guy who he was coming out of his apartment on the first floor. Hey, I'm Alex. Hey, nice to meet you. Whatever. I'm, doing Airbnb upstairs. And this guy had no interest. Like he was just short. He wasn't like unfriendly, but he just didn't have any interest in talking. He was going out doing his thing. And that was it, so one thing you can always tell to kind of overcome this objection, okay, not disrupting neighbors, mentioning that you always have quiet hours. So you have it in your house rules that's kind of printed, you have it in your directions for like auto messages, things like that, quiet hours that we impose from typically 10 p.m. to 8 a.m.
Yeah, screening guests with like the IDs and stuff like that.
Exactly.
That's a big one.
Screening guests, noise monitors to monitor the decibel level. So one thing that we have always, that has always kind of impressed, owners that we're speaking to, our use of different technology and softwares, and this is even, just one other example of like a technology is, so not just the noise monitor, that's like the size of like a hockey puck, not just that, but even smart locks, which is, and like, hey, this is one of those things like they may not even, before they even say, well, who's paying for the smart lock? No, nope. Give them that information first. I'm paying for the smart lock. You can, and then I can, anytime a lease is over in the future, if you want to go separate ways, that's fine. I'll put your lock back on. No problem. You can hang on to it. I'll hang on to it, whatever, but for overcoming that one, impact on neighbors, yeah, primarily letting them know Airbnb guests are very polite. It's very, very rare that you have Airbnb guests that are like just rude people because they know that they're staying in someone's personal house, someone's residence. So people are polite. Some people are, the cleaner might say, oh, there's a little, more cleaning involved. Okay, no big deal. But it's very rare that, very, very rare that there's any sort of neighbor to Airbnb like disruption. I can't even think of a single example in the multiple multifamily properties that we lease apartments in. I can't think of any examples. And one thing I also like to do when we're starting up a new property, I'll introduce myself to the neighbors. And so like, hey, I'm Alex, we're managing this property next door. Here's my phone number. Give me a call. So like, again, kind of building some rapport with the neighbors. So you can let the owner, if you're doing arbitrage, let the owner know, hey, I also do this. And I'm happy to, meet any of your neighbors that you already know, whatever. So that way the neighbors are not caught off guard. Like, okay, if there's ever anything that comes up, I can just call Alex or George, whatever, like, hey, this is happening or whatever. So to stay on everybody's, kind of good side there.
Yeah. I mean, so that right there, like, and we have a ton of objections and how to handle them and the things to say, that's all, inside our school group. But the things that when I think about are, what they're like, you have ChatGPT, go ask ChatGPT. What are the most common Airbnb objections? Study them, know your answers cold. And that way, when it comes up, you can bring it up. Whether it come from the fact that you can like really assure them that you don't talk about squatters because STR tenants don't have leases. It's like you can't squat at a hotel. So, it's stuff like that. But that is the stage of presenting your value, the value proposition. That is the stage where you lay out all the objections beforehand and answer them in a way where now you turn into positives. If you can turn every objection that they're going to have into a positive for them, man, at the end of the call, it makes it, or in-person meeting, it makes it that much easier for them to go yes. So, okay, Alex, we've hit our value proposition. The next thing I would say is bring it back to them and try and understand their needs. And I would say that's where we figure out their main concerns and we tailor our offer to meet them. So what am I talking about? I'm saying, hey, like what kind of things are you looking for in a lease like this situation with us as, doing it with STRs? And then, you get requests they have or any concerns they have about the property or the deal. That's that stage. So I guess Alex, I'll turn to you. Like, as you've gone through this process, in the negotiation phase, before the lease is signed, but just like talking about it, what are some of the concerns that they bring up that they just want to address, with you after they've already warmed to the idea? What are some of the concerns that may be different that they try to address with you, advice a long-term tenant?
Sure. So, I would say it kind of depends on the building. We'll use this example of like a multifamily property, because for Airbnb arbitrage, you have a lot of flexibility with multifamily properties. There's also room for growth. But, one thing that you may want in the lease that might be different from a long-term tenant is who is responsible for any sort of wear and tear to like common areas. So, because that will be one, and I'll preface this by saying, in the grand scheme of things, this is not expensive. So, one wear and tear item that might occur in a common area, depending on kind of the width of the stairs, if it's a multi-story building, like suitcases, kind of scuff in the wall or something, right? So that might be something, that you would need, that a landlord would want in the lease that they may not have with a long-term tenant, is some of these common area issues. And you, as the Airbnb tenant, you would definitely want the lease to be thorough and to describe who's responsible for what. Are there washers and dryers in the building that are in common areas that are available for everyone? Okay, what happens if something, needs repair? Who's responsible for that? So those types of conversations with the owner are definitely important for these common area issues.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's good. That brings up the next kind of bullet point I think about is like offering our next step to the owner or landlord. And you kind of broached it, right? It's, hey, we definitely want to move forward. They're on board with it. Okay, cool. Like, we'll send you a release. Hey, cool. Here's what I'll do too. Like, we'll review the lease, but before you even send it to us, we'll send you some of the common things that we, think that we come into things with, like the maintenance thing that Alex discussed. And also we'll send you a subletting addendum to add to the lease. So that can be in the lease, like legally allowing you to do it. Because even if they say, yeah, you can do it, it needs to be in that lease, because when it doesn't matter what Bill, the landlord, told you, if the owner's like, no, it's on the lease. So you got to make sure it's on the lease.
And similar to, I'll give one kind of example of like in day-to-day Airbnb management, right? So if you have a guest who damages something by accident, or like, let's say they break a wine glass, right? Well, let's say it's $20 wine glass, and you're like, oh, you know what? The guest wasn't forthcoming. They didn't mention it, and it was just shattered on the floor. They could have mentioned it, but they didn't, right? Let's say that example for a sec. So in Airbnb, you need to treat it like a court case. We have, for how to handle that, wait for the guest to leave a review before you submit a request for reimbursement. So there's all sorts of things. So the only reason I bring this up is you need to treat this conversation. You're signing a legal document, right? You're signing a lease with the landlord to do arbitrage, let's say. So if the landlord is saying, no, don't worry about it, we'll just have this verbal agreement, you know what? That's a red flag right there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that like, if we can't agree on this very first step, you know what? There's a million deals out there. Don't be afraid to look somewhere else. If something in your gut is like, no, the landlord's saying, no, we don't need to have the subletting part or anything like that, Airbnb addendum in the lease. We don't need that. What? Yes, we do. You need to cover yourself. So in the same way with Airbnb, even for a $20 wine glass or whatever it is, you need to treat things like a court case. You need to put on your lawyer hat and come ready, because if you ever did need to go to court over anything Airbnb related, and then the lease, gets brought up to the bench and there's no addendum in there about short-term rentals, you might be in a tough spot.
Yeah.
So definitely pay attention to that and have a professional conversation. And hey, these are my requests. You can go back and forth on the wording, let's say, but there needs to be something in there. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that's good. That final end of this whole thing is, okay, the lease is pitched, and okay, that's going to come. You end the meeting with rapport. like a little rapport sandwich. You get some rapport back, and then you always make sure you have like the next meeting set. So you don't want them to jerk you around. Hey, so don't leave without scheduling the next meeting or getting like a, hey, the lease will be sent, whatever. And depending on if you're looking for, now if this is like a co-host deal and you're like trying to like wow a property manager, you can be like, yeah, hey, cool, I'm going to be like bouncing around a few other properties this week, so let me know, let's lock in a time to go over the details. But whatever, just increasing your sense of, hey, I have other stuff I'm doing too. Little things here and there. With property managers, with landlords and stuff, you probably don't need to like, play those games with them, especially if they've agreed to letting you have the lease. So I would say at that point, just to get the next meeting set and then move forward from there. But yeah, I think that brings it full circle. Like I said, we have a full module in the school community on this. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll include the link to our school community here, and then we can get you turned into that stuff so you can see that, the objections, the way that we map the conversations, all that stuff. And then I think if we're looking at the Start Your First Unit series, which this is in, we've done, hey, the sub-market, market research, we've done the finding the property, now we've done the we've done the pitching with the landlord, conversational mapping, objection handling. The final thing, I believe, will be pretty much what happens when they say yes, all the way up until the first unit starts. So, and then we'll have to start a whole new series about our operational back end stuff that we do. But for the finale of the Start Your Unit series, mini series that we're doing, I think the next video will be a fun little, hey, what do you do once they say yes? And that video should be popping up somewhere right about now on the screen. So just go and click that button. Sure, we'll do there again. Hey, click that. So click that, and we'll see you there. All right, cheers.
All right, sounds good.